Welcome back to Andyn Farm. This week we're going to show you how to prune an apple. We're going to prune an apple called Irish Eyes, which is quite an old heritage tree. And I'm also going to give you an insight into one of the ways that we use to try and encourage further wildlife by showing you a dead hedge that we built last year that's been used and has had various birds nesting in it this year. Just while I'm here, one of the things that I always tend to do just before we do any pruning is just to make sure that my secateurs are always nice and sharp. I just use a very simple diamond blade or diamond carbon spike, and obviously being very careful, just make sure that I've got a nice sharp blade, which I have. I tend to prefer bypass secateurs where we've got two blades or a blade that cuts against another blade, so it gives a slightly cleaner cut. You get more power with what's called an anvil secateur, which is a flat blade, but for me personally I always prefer bypass secateurs where you've got a nice curved blade and you get a nice action. There's various sizes available, various different things, but everybody's got their own favourites, but I always tend to use bypass. So if you want to come along, we'll go and show you how to prune an apple tree. This is Irish Eyes, which is one of our heritage trees that we've been growing. When we originally planted the tree in one of the storms, this one has actually come over on its side. So you can see where the base of the tree is, probably a foot on the other side, and I've still got a bit of a guard around the base just to protect it from being nibbled. The main shoot here though, the main trunk that's now developed, is still Irish Eyes. And actually I'm quite happy with the size of the tree and the shape of the tree, and it's nice to have a bit of a sprawl to it. All I want to do really is to open up the centre to try and avoid having too many crossing stems and too much small growth, which is just going to take energy from the plant. So I'm just spur tip pruning back. This will control the size of the tree, but it'll also mean that I've got a much better chance of having some decent fruit next summer. One of the first things we always look at when we're going to start pruning a tree is any dead, diseased or damaged growth that wants to be removed. Looking at this one here, because it's had quite a bit of damage over on that far side, I am going to take that whole branch off. So you can see that with this one, it has had quite a lot of chewing damage, which could well be mice and voles last winter. So with that one, rather than leaving that where it started to develop a bit of disease in there where it's been chewed, I'm going to cut that stem off. Anything that's crossing ideally should be cut out and removed. So if I let this branch develop much longer, this is going to rub, and you can see it's already just started to rub against the main trunk here where it's over on its side. So what I'm going to do is, I've got an upward facing bud just in the centre there, so I'm going to come in and cut just above, and then the new shoot will develop from the base. It won't then produce flowers or fruit from there this year, but it will then encourage a new upright shoot to come. Key pruning tips basically are, you want an open habit to allow plenty of air movement through the branches. You don't want to encourage anything that's crossing or rubbing, wants to be removed and cut out. Where you've got long extension growth that it's put on this year, you want to shorten the back. This spur pruning basically is pruning for fruit. At the moment we've got quite a big top coming on this tree and it's becoming quite big. I'm going to bring that top down, which does two things. One is it's got less chance of getting knocked and moved in the next storm, but also it's going to encourage a heavier development of fruit lower down, which is then easier to pick as well. I'm going to prune this one back to this bud here that's facing outwards from the centre, rather than coming up to a bud that's facing inwards. If I took it back here, then it's going to grow, the new shoot is going to grow back towards that stem. So I'm going to come up here, and it's basically pruning to an outward facing bud where we can, and shortening and trying to almost a goblet effect, but open centre. A really good tip for remembering is to look at your hand, and basically that's what we're trying to encourage. So if you imagine that the buds are my knuckles and you want an open centre and all your shoots around the outside facing outwards, so you've got plenty of air movement between them. Spur pruning, which is the main pruning that we carry out on this sort of apple tree, which is where this is this year's growth. So I've got approximately 2 foot there of new growth, and I want to shorten that back to normally 3 to 5 buds. So each one of these where my finger is now is a bud. So for example, with that one, I'm going to shorten it back to 3 buds. Again, this is probably too small this year to actually fruit, but I'm going to take that back to 2. Okay, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take that one back as well. And basically the key really is shortening back all of this year's growth. If I left this, then again, we talked about it with the pears the other week, all the nutrients are going to go into, be split amongst all these buds all the way up the stem. So you've got, this is all this year's growth, and this is where it's been pruned to last year. So basically what I want to do is leave 2 or 3 buds, and what that means is rather than the nutrients being split all the way up across, I'm forcing all the nutrients that are going to shoot up here in the spring into those few buds that are left, and that's going to give you a much higher chance of, although you've got less flowers, but the fruit that will develop on that spur is much more likely to hold and produce an eating apple of a good size, rather than lots and lots of little fruit, which if they get too dry in the summer could then well abort, which is when they drop off. Just while I'm doing this, one of the projects we were doing for a client this week, he actually had in his garden what was called a family tree, and it hadn't been pruned for several years. So we went in to do some restorative pruning, opening back up the tree. He had 4 varieties of apple that were grown on one tree, which is quite common if you've only got space for one tree. Basically, your different apple varieties tend to be grafted onto a rootstock, and in the middle of his lawn he had one tree with 4 different varieties of apple, all of which will then flower at the same time, which ensures pollination for the apples, because you've got in very close proximity, literally on one tree, several varieties of apple that are all in flower at the same time. So one of the key things we try and encourage on the site is basically to try and have as much natural help with looking after pests and diseases as we can. One of the key aspects for that for us is to provide as much areas or habitat as we can for insects and small birds within the site. Last winter we created another bit of habitat which has been used by various birds for nesting during the course of the summer. The dead hedge isn't something that we've suddenly invented ourselves. It's been used for years and years and years. But to make it, basically, we've got short, stout pegs or poles that we've then driven into the ground or knocked into the ground with a hammer, and then we've woven the bigger sticks and bigger material in between it to actually form it. And you can see it's bedded itself down quite nicely. The birds have pulled leaves into it, and also we'll find this winter that there'll be insects that will be overwintering in there as well. Could possibly be hedgehogs in at the base. But again, it's an additional bit of shelter, an additional bit of habitat that we've created, because if you look behind us, the hedge this time of year is quite sparse, particularly underneath the oak tree. So by creating quite a nice wide section of dead hedge here, this has created quite a lot of habitat which has been used for nesting birds over the course of the summer. In a garden setting, If you've got somewhere out on the boundary where it's not necessarily as visible, this is an ideal way of reusing your garden waste rather than having to chop it all up for recycling. If you can just weave it into a section and create a bit of habitat, then you're helping to bring in more insects and more wildlife into your garden. And then again, that's going to help to reduce your pests and diseases. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what we're trying to show you, then please obviously feel free to let us know. If you've got any further queries or if you want anything else covering in a video, then just let us know and we'll try and work something in for you. Are you getting that? You can't get the bird. There's two of them. There's a baby blue tit and a blue tit just in on the, so the blue tit's in the centre and the baby's just at the top here.